What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the MK7 and the Deadeye AR because ever since the MK has gotten unvaulted, I've had a lot of players asking me if this is going to be the new meta AR or if the Deadeye AR is still better. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, comment down below which AR is your favorite, and if you guys would like to use my code in the shop when getting anything, it is EvolveJake, just like my channel name is, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So the MK7 has been a fan favorite AR ever since it was introduced in Chapter 3, and it doesn't really seem like there was many stat changes at all, if any, since it was in the game last time in Chapter 6 Season 4 just a few months ago. But to me, at least, it feels like it has much less recoil now than it did before. This definitely makes it easier to use. In Chapter 6 Season 4, the recoil was definitely controllable, but it was a struggle. And now it's still controllable, but it definitely is a bit harder to control or has a bit more recoil than that of the Deadeye AR. It also has a much higher fire rate than the Deadeye AR, which is going to be its main advantage. The MK7 has a fire rate of 9, while the Deadeye has a fire rate of 5.5 shots per second. So a little under double the fire rate of the Deadeye AR. And to make up for this fire rate difference, the Deadeye does have slightly higher base damage. It's about 4 more damage per rarity if you compare equal rarities like a gray Deadeye compared to a gray MK. The Deadeye will do about 4 more damage. If you start going up several rarities, that's where the damage difference really can shine. Like if you compared a purple Deadeye to like a gray MK, the difference in damage would be huge. But rarity of equal rarities, the Deadeye does a little bit more damage. So this 4 damage is nice, but it's not a drastic difference as far as ARs go, and I feel like the fire rate difference the MK has is more of an advantage than the damage difference the Deadeye has. And because of the MK's higher fire rate, the MK does have a higher DPS. It's usually about 40 DPS more or so if you compare equal rarities, and DPS is damage per second. And I see a lot of people talking about weapons in this game or talking about stats of weapons in this game, and they just look at DPS and they say, this gun does higher DPS, therefore it is better. And in a vacuum, that is true. If you just had 2 people shooting at the exact same time, not hitting a single shot, not hitting headshots, range isn't a factor, in that type of situation, DPS would win out. But a lot of times, DPS ignores a lot of the context of a weapon. Like we talked about, recoil-wise, the MK does have more recoil and is a bit harder to control than the Deadeye. While it feels easier to me than it did in the past, it still does have more recoil. And so that's something that can kind of throw off DPS. If you start, missing shots, you're not doing damage with those shots. The Deadeye also has a higher headshot multiplier, and with its base damage and higher headshot multiplier, you're going to deal much more damage with headshots. For example, the blue MK will deal 30 damage with headshots, while the blue Deadeye will deal 42 damage per headshots. And so if you're able to consistently hit headshots, the Deadeye will probably out DPS the MK. It gets weird to compare weapons just strictly looking at DPS because it does ignore a lot of context. Also, as far as range goes, the Deadeye feels much better to me. Not only is the recoil better and much easier to control, but from my experience, it feels like the MK falls off kind of hard, like damage-wise at longer range, where the Deadeye does too, but it's like not as drastic, which is something I want in an AR. The MK is probably going to be better than the Deadeye at 30 meters. Sure. But at 70, 80 meters, those longer range AR fights, especially when you're playing cover and the opponent is playing cover, I feel like those situations are where the Deadeye is going to shine as like an actual assault rifle. I feel like sometimes when talking about stats, and especially when talking about DPS, again, a lot of the context goes ignored. If you think about how fights play out with an AR, I really value that higher headshot damage because if somebody's playing cover well, you probably only have their head to look at. And in that instance, the Deadeye is going to do a lot more damage than the MK, especially with all the mobility in the current loot pool. Shooting at somebody who's wingsuiting away or shockwaving away feels much better with the Deadeye than the MK. The range, I think, plays a part in this, but another thing that plays a part in it is going to be the sights, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, I want to talk about another disadvantage the MK has, and that is going to be its hipfire accuracy, especially while moving and jumping. And this is something that sounds kind of niche, but if you're someone who uses a pump, this is really going to matter. If you use a twin hammer shotguns, it doesn't really matter. But if you're using a pump shotgun, you often shoot your pump and then swap to your AR and start spraying. And in these close range fights, movement matters a lot. You're not just going to be standing there swapping weapons. You're probably going to be moving around, and you're probably going to be jumping when you swap weapons. And if you do that with the MK, the hipfire accuracy is basically like the entire screen. Like, you have those dashes on your screen that represent the shot can go basically anywhere within those dashes. If you're jumping and shooting the MK, it has like comedically large range in which the shots can go. So the hipfire accuracy on the MK is really bad in those situations. Again, this won't matter to most people because the twin hammer shotguns are definitely the more popular shotgun this season. And so a lot of people using that anyways just aren't really going to care about this hipfire problem with the MK. But if you're a pump user, I think the Deadeye is a better spray weapon despite having a lower fire rate. You would think the higher fire rate one would just be, you know, universally better. But from my experience, because of the accuracy, I'd rather actually have the Deadeye than the MK when it comes to swapping. And so when I was using the MK, I was using the twin hammer shotguns because I feel like they combo better. This next point is just completely preference. I personally like the sight on the Deadeye more than the MK. To me, the MK feels like it has higher zoom, and that throws me off because in Fortnite and in most other shooters, how zoomed in the weapon is kind of affects how your sensitivity feels. And this is the biggest reason, I think, why I prefer the Deadeye. I just feel significantly more comfortable with the Deadeye's sight. Like, the zoom level just feels perfect to me, especially when it comes to longer ranges, and especially when it comes to fights where the enemy is using any sort of movement. I touched on the wingsuit and I touched on the shockwaves earlier. And very frequently, if you're fighting somebody who's decent in zero build, they're probably going to use mobility a good amount, especially in medium to long range. If you hit them like 100 in medium range and then go to push them, they're probably going to try to use some mobility of their own to get away, and this creates a situation where you're probably shooting at them as they're shockwaving away or as they're wingsuiting away. And the Deadeye AR, I feel like, to me at least, because of the zoom of the weapon, I feel much more comfortable hitting shots on people using these mobility items, and I feel like my aim is just much more consistent with it. And this is why earlier I kind of talked about the DPS kind of being a misleading stat. It's not the end all be all, because that's assuming you're hitting every single shot, which you're probably not going to be doing because nobody's perfect. But even then, how the different sights feel, if that affects your level of comfortability with the weapon and affects your aim, you're probably going to feel more comfortable with one rather than the other. And I think this will be a huge distinguishing factor. The weapon you feel most comfortable aiming with and most comfortable hitting shots with, and you hit more shots consistently, probably going to be the best weapon for you, regardless of what the weapon stats are on paper, because you're not getting the on paper stats all the time if you're missing a bunch of shots. So even if the sights were the same, I think I would still lean Deadeye because of how AR fights play out. Like I said, I really value that higher headshot multiplier, and I really value that range. But the sight is a big difference, big deal maker to me personally, because like I said, I just value the one that I'm going to hit shots with most consistently. So each of these weapons has pros and cons. The Deadeye, one final thing I want to touch on before we get into that is ammo. I kind of forgot about this for a second. But the MK can run through ammo, which can be a problem, especially in squads and especially early game. Once you get rolling in like the mid game, you've probably looted enough enemy players that it's not as big of a deal. But in the early game especially, the ammo lacking of the MK can be, or not necessarily lacking, but the fact that the MK runs through ammo could be a problem to you, especially if you're someone who plays team game modes. But in summary, both of these weapons have advantages and disadvantages. I don't think it's just clear cut that one is better than the other. I think the one that is going to be best is the one that you feel most comfortable with. And to me, that is the Deadeye AR. And I think to a lot of people, it's going to be the Deadeye AR because it's the one that's been in loot pool for the longest. Also, as somebody who likes to use the pump shotgun, the hipfire accuracy of the MK really kills it for me. But I get that most people for the twin hammer shotguns, and that won't really matter one way or the other. So I think the Deadeye is better. If someone says they think the MK is better, I don't think they're crazy. A lot of it is just preference and, play style. But for me, I feel like I feel a lot better with the Deadeye, and I just feel like the game is so much easier when I have the Deadeye because I'm able to like consistently get tags on people. I'm able to like consistently pressure or eliminate enemies using movement, and those things will just make the rest of the game a lot easier to play out. If people have a hard time using movement to escape you, you're not gonna have to you know, fight the same person over and over again because they keep running away and resetting. But let me know which one you prefer. If you guys enjoyed this video, found it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more. I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.